Hello, sports fans, and welcome back to Ball Games and Beyond. I am your host, Evan Grote, and Ball Games and Beyond is brought to you by Sportsnaut.com. Please go out there and make sure you're following and subscribing to Ball Games and Beyond by searching it anywhere you get your favorite podcasts. And also make sure you're following and subscribing to the Sportsnaut YouTube channel so that you're getting all of the new video content that we're providing for you each and every day. And don't forget to click that notifications bell while you're at it. Now, NFL season is nearly upon us. The preseason is over. College football gets underway this Saturday with a full slate of games. So football season, it is here, but we still have about a week and a half before the NFL season gets underway on Thursday night with that much anticipated game between the Chiefs and the Ravens. I know you're looking forward to it as well as I am. So we have some time here, and I thought it'd be a great time to talk NFL quarterback tier list. That's right. Mike Sando, who's a writer for The Athletic each and every year. In fact, the last 11 years, he has released this project that he works on where he has all of the quarterbacks, most of the quarterbacks, I should say, starting quarterbacks ranked and put into tiers, and it released on Monday. And I love a good quarterback debate. I'm sure you do as well. If you follow me on X, which you can do at eGroat5, then you know that I love discussing quarterbacks, who's the GOAT, who's the top five, this and that. I love to talk quarterbacks. I was a quarterback myself once a long time ago in high school. But anyhow, we are lucky enough this week to have Mike Sando as our guest, and we're going to bring him on in just a few minutes. And we're going to talk to Mike about the entire process that he goes through when he undergoes this project. I know it's a big project for him. He interviews and discusses with 50 different coaches and general managers throughout the league to get their opinion and their feedback, and has those men rank the quarterbacks and put them into tiers. It's a fascinating piece of work, really, and it's something that I look forward to each and every year. So that is the topic for the show today, quarterback tier list. And just to kind of give you a preview, for those of you who have not yet read the article or looked at the list, I encourage you to do so. Go ahead and check it out here, even maybe before you listen to the interview. But tier one this year, there were only 3 quarterbacks listed. That was number 1, Patrick Mahomes, number 2, Joe Burrow, and number 3, Josh Allen. That number is down from what we have seen in past years. In fact, if you read the article, you'll learn that this is the lowest number of quarterbacks that were in tier one since the 2016 season. We're going to talk to Mike about that and get his opinion on why that is. Also, we had a couple quarterbacks who were tier one in 2023, but now find themselves in tier two. That is Justin Herbert and Aaron Rodgers. Both of those quarterbacks dealt with injuries, so it's justifiable to see them listed in tier two. One of the quarterbacks who some of you might be sitting there saying, I can't believe he didn't make it to tier one, Lamar Jackson. Yeah, I think there's a good debate to be had there about Lamar Jackson and where he belongs. You'll learn that he fell just outside tier one. He's still in tier two, but I would not be shocked to see him make that jump this year into tier one. So there's a lot to dissect here in this article. But we're going to bring Mike on now. I'm going to step aside here, get to a quick break, and we're going to ask Mike about all of these different things. And there's just a lot to get into. So don't go anywhere. You don't want to miss this conversation coming up next on Ball Games and Beyond, brought to you by Sportsnaut.com. And welcome back to Ball Games and Beyond. I am your host, Evan Grote. And now we bring in our guest for this week. And joining us is Mike Sando, who is a staff writer for The Athletic. And Mike has covered the NFL for 25 plus years. He's also a Hall of Fame voter. He gets to vote in the AP awards as well. So he's been around the game quite a bit. And he's also the mastermind behind the NFL quarterback tier list that you can read about right now on The Athletic. Mike, I know this is a big week for you, so I appreciate you making a few minutes for us today.
It really is fun. I spent a couple months on this project, gathering, talking to the 50 coaches and evaluators around the league to get their thoughts on all these quarterbacks. And when it's done, it's really fun to see. And I'm always, interested what the feedback's going to be, because when you're on the inside, everything seems normal and to make sense. And then when you present it, you get feedback like, what about this? What about that? And that's fun.
Yeah, I want to ask you about a little bit of that feedback that you get in just a minute.
Mhm.
So let's jump right into it. This is something that I look forward to every year reading on The Athletic. So I know there's a lot of fans out there like myself that really look forward to this each year. And you talked about that process a little bit just a second ago. Could you go into a little bit more depth with that? I know you said you
Yeah.
interviewed 50 different coaches and general
Mhm.
managers from around the league.
Sure.
And I know this is probably one of the biggest projects you work on all year, but if you could just go into a little bit more detail
Yeah.
about the length and just the whole
Mhm.
process.
Yeah, well, this started in 2014, back when I was at ESPN, and it was really just trying to figure out how the league sees the position and what's really most important. And it grew really into talking to these 50 coaches and executives. So what happens is after the draft really is when the rosters are pretty well set at the quarterback position. We know who's going to be where and who's going to be vying for a starting job. So I'll take a bigger list that will include some guys who won't even be in the survey when it publishes because let's say Jarrett Stidham isn't a starter, right? So he goes by the wayside, but I have him include him in the list. So when I talk to all these coaches and executives and give them the criteria, which they helped me really formulate over the years, it's really a group effort with me doing most of the learning. They will place each one of those quarterbacks into a tier that they feel is appropriate for that quarterback, taking into account, his situation, the scheme around him, all of those types of things that cloud really the where the credit should go, right? Division of credit is a very difficult thing to determine in football relative to golf. In
Yeah.
golf, we know that that guy who just hit the ball is at fault for
Yeah.
or credit for where it went. And in football, we like, okay, Kyle Shanahan's his coach. They have a lot of good players. Is Brock Purdy really that good? And so those types of discussions come out of it. I don't know that we solve them, but we at least get a market analysis. By the end of this, we can say pretty clearly what the league at large thinks about these players, and that's fun.
Yeah, that's great stuff there. So let's start with your tier one quarterbacks. You
Mhm.
mentioned there were only 3 quarterbacks this year in the
Yeah.
tier 1, and that's down from what you've seen in
Mhm.
in past years. I think it's the lowest total you've seen since 2016, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. It was
Yeah.
Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, number 1, Joe Burrow,
Yeah.
followed by Josh Allen. I guess what I'm curious to get your thoughts on is, do you think this is an indication now that we are in fact seeing less elite quarterback play and just more kind of middle of the road, average, maybe even a little above average quarterback play
Yeah.
throughout the league? So, what are some of your thoughts on
Yeah.
having less
Yeah.
quarterbacks in tier one?
I think we've seen a passing of the torch to where, Tom Brady's not playing, Ben Roethlisberger's not playing, Drew Brees is not playing, and these guys have kind of left the game, kind of one at a time over the years. Every once in a while, Philip Rivers might be seen as tier one. Some of those guys that were just playing forever. So we've gotten younger, way younger at the position. Last year, I did a column going into the season. It was like the youngest group of starting quarterbacks since like the 50s. So that's a huge thing. It doesn't mean that quarterback play has gotten, way worse or anything, because a lot of those younger guys are promising. And we saw C.J. Stroud or Jordan Love make big pushes up the board with the hopes that they may be tier one someday. And Justin Herbert has been in tier one before, wasn't this time. Lamar Jackson's right there. Certainly is a tier one quarterback according to almost half of the voters. So there's a lot of good quarterbacks, and there's a lot of teams that are doing a good job trying to help their guy look good and play well. I think that's been a little bit of an evolution in coaching to now where these teams feel like, hey, uh, we can win with Brock Purdy, right? We can win with some of these guys if we set it up right around them and have a good scheme. Even though Brock Purdy would not be considered the prototype physical athlete at the position like a Josh Allen would be, right? They're totally different players, but you can have a good offense with Brock Purdy if it's set up well around him. And so that is really, I think, what we're seeing happening to where some of these guys in tier two or tier three, who maybe they're not, on that level of those top guys, can still have really good seasons and especially in tier two, there's 11 guys in tier two. I think most of those teams think they can get to the Super Bowl. And we've seen several of the quarterbacks in there have, whether it's Purdy or Jalen Hurts or Jared Goff. These guys have been, Matt Stafford, these guys have been to Super Bowls. So
Yeah.
that's
I
probably
think
what it
what we
is.
all know is obviously the quarterback position is the most important position on the field, but also you have to have a very good team around you as well as coordinators and some of the other factors that you said these coaches have to consider when they rank each quarterback. Now, one of the players you mentioned just a second ago was Justin Herbert, and he is one of the two quarterbacks who fell from tier 1 to tier 2 this year along with Aaron Rodgers. And I think the debate with Justin Herbert is fascinating. It's one that I've had myself on X
Yeah.
with people. Um,
Yeah.
he came in tied for fifth in the rankings. Do you think he's placed appropriately? Because you point out some really good stats on Herbert. 30-32 overall record as a starting quarterback, has yet to win a playoff game. Where do you think the coaches and GMs did a good job of ranking him where he is at 5 overall?
I think so. I mean, I think let's just independently, if we were going to have a draft of all of the quarterbacks, I don't think he would go lower than that. I think everybody would love to have Justin Herbert. He has had unusually bad defense on his team. And so, like, he's the opposite of Lamar Jackson's situation, right? Lamar Jackson's had a top 5 defense, a top 5 special teams every year. And so that's how you can get good quarterback play, sometimes really good quarterback play, and win 80%. Now, Justin Herbert has had bottom 5 defense play. Special teams have been up and down, but that explains why he's barely a 500 quarterback. He might be a 60 or 70% win quarterback if you gave him a top 5 defense. I mean, he might have the similar record, right? So that's hard to contextualize and hard to kind of always figure out at a certain point if you're in the league long enough and don't win or don't get over the hump. That kind of goes on your record too. We saw that like with the Matthew Stafford in Detroit, where he was always kind of in tier 2. People felt like, hey, is something missing? This guy has tier 1 talent. Why isn't he winning more, even some playoff games? And then he goes to a good organization like the Rams and he wins the Super Bowl, right? So it is sometimes hard to separate the results of the team from the player, but we try to do a pretty good job, and I think the voters here did a pretty good job of saying mostly tier 2 for Justin Herbert, but there's definitely the upside of tier 1.
Absolutely. I'd have to agree with that assessment as well. Now, at the top of the interview, you talked about getting feedback, and I'm sure you're talking about from some of the readers out there, because I know a lot of these fans out there, they're going to have their own opinion on what they're reading. But
Yeah.
is there a player or two in particular that you get the most feedback on where fans are telling you, you know what, I think he's ranked a little too high, or I think he's ranked a little too low? Who are you, whose
Yeah.
name keeps popping up in your feedback this year?
So it depends on the year. This year, initially, people questioned Burrow being as high and being over Josh Allen when he's missed some games, and probably is less dynamic as an athlete, obviously, than Josh Allen is as well. So I didn't know that was going to be coming. That was just an initial one. Last year, for sure, Purdy was pretty low because he'd only played about 5 games. So people were like, "Come on," and I always say, "Relax." He'll come up when he's played more. People want to see more. Lamar Jackson has often been somebody. Hey, wait a minute, the MVP of the league, not in tier 1, and some of the voters agree. Like, come on, what are we doing here? So there's a discussion to be had there. I think those are some interesting ones that stood out this year, but almost in every fan base, you'll get a little bit of feedback of why is this guy not a little bit higher? People are biased.
Absolutely. Now, you had two quarterbacks who made a really big jump this year, up 13 spots. Two quarterbacks, Brock Purdy, Jordan Love. You talked about both of them. You mentioned both of them.
Hmm. Hmm.
When you look at the list that you currently have, can you project who you think might be next year's version of Brock Purdy or Jordan Love and make a big jump? Who are you projecting based on some of the analysis that you've done to make a big jump in the following year here?
Yeah, so guys, the safer picks for that would be like Trevor Lawrence, who fell 7 spots this year down to 16. He could easily go back up with a good year. I think Kyler Murray has a talent to make that type of a jump. But in terms of people who haven't already been kind of in second tier in the past years, you probably have to just circle and star next to Anthony Richardson, knowing that
Ooh.
he could flop too. Like there's some volatility here. with him because we don't know if he's going to be able to stay healthy and be a consistent enough passer. But I think he's in a good scheme. He certainly has lights out athletic ability and talent. So if those things can come together, I think he has a chance to make a jump. There's just enough of a risk involved with it that I wouldn't take it to the bank. I would just sort of put an asterisk by him based on the upside. Whereas some of the other guys down there in tier four, Daniel Jones might be decent, but I don't think there's going to be a super high, ceiling. And Will Levis, I don't think is, Bryce Young, probably some physical limitations. He'll be better, but I don't necessarily see him making a, pushing to the pushing to get into, the top of tier two necessarily this year.
What about a quarterback like CJ Stroud? Had a phenomenal year last year. I think he came in at 8th on your list, on the tier
Yeah, high.
list. Right. Do you expect him to, if he can repeat what he did last year, possibly crack that tier 1 category? Would you be at all surprised to see that?
I wouldn't because he got 12 tier one votes this year. That's a lot. So if you look, I've got the vote distribution on my screen here. There were one, two, three, four, five, six. There's 8 guys who got double digit votes in tier one, and he was one of them. And the next guy had 4. Dak Prescott had 4, so he had 3 times as many just right out of the gate. So I think he's well on his way to ascending with another good year. What's interesting there, though, is sometimes, when you have great success early, the expectations can exceed what's realistic.
True.
And, every season's different. You can't just assume you're going to pick up where you left off. What's interesting to me about Houston is they were a team with super low expectations from the outside going in. People thought they were bad. And really, in retrospect, pretty good at the receiver position, pretty good on the offensive line. D'Amico Ryans acquitted himself pretty well. Maybe Bobby Slowick was a good offensive coordinator. So, did Stroud go into a situation that was way better than we anticipated, or did he make the situation good by being so excellent? Probably a little bit of an overlap in that, but I think it's safe to say that the Texans were not as bad as people thought going in, independent of him. And so maybe because people's expectations were so low for Houston, did Stroud get a little bit more credit than he would have otherwise gotten if people thought it was a good situation going in?
Right. Great explanation there. We'll finish the interview up on this one. We had several quarterbacks get drafted in round 1 this past year. I believe it was 6 to be exact. And while it's very early on, I mean, the season hasn't even started yet, but based on what we have seen from some of these guys in the preseason, they're off to a very, very good start. When it comes to rookie quarterbacks, what is the highest you've seen a rookie quarterback be placed in the tiers in the
Yeah.
following season? And do you think it's possible we could see one of these guys, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, whomever it may
Yeah.
be, possibly, jump over that previous record?
Yeah, so before this year, the record I think was Herbert, who came in pretty well into tier two, but Stroud broke it. Stroud is the highest at coming in 8th overall. His average tier vote was 1.82, so he was solidly in the twos. That's the record. So that's the bar to go for. And I do think there's a chance. I think Caleb Williams has a ton of talent. He's going into a decent situation where they've had a chance to build the roster up around him a little bit. Going to be a lot of expectations. But I think he'd be interesting. And then, Jaden Daniels has, sometimes when rookies come in and do well, there is a rushing component to them that helps take some of the pressure off. They're able to make some things happen. Could he possibly, I don't know if the team around him, we'll see, is going to let him do that. I have some questions about, maybe the durability of if he's running and taking some of the hits like he took in college. But there's some talent there, I think, especially at the top, where you could see that happen. I would not expect that with Drake May, given his situation, and given what some of the evals I've heard of him coming out are a little bit more mixed. I think Michael Penix isn't going to play probably much at all the first year with Kirk Cousins there. And then, JJ McCarthy's out for the year, and Bo Nix probably could be efficient in the Sean Payton offense. I don't know how dynamic he'll be, but that's an interesting one to watch that isn't getting talked about. They have a pretty good offensive line there, and I think Sean Payton's a really good coach. So that could be a little bit of a just one to put a check mark by to see.
Yep, it'll be interesting to see in a couple years, how high some of these quarterbacks in this year's class get ranked. Mike, great job. We appreciate you joining us. You can follow Mike on X at Sando NFL, and you can find the quarterback tier list right now on The Athletic. I encourage you to go out there and do so. Mike, once again, thank you so much for the time, and keep up all the great work you do.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. Have a great night.